6 months ago, Mark Williams sat in a quiet, sterile room at the University of Iowa hospitals. The walls were pale. The light above buzzed faintly. And the doctor's words didn't land like a bomb. They landed like silence. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Advanced. Aggressive. No cure. Only time. Mark didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just nodded. A man who'd built homes his entire life, now watching his own life crumble brick by brick. Back in Des Moines, Rachel tried to stay strong. She held his hand during treatments, cooked when he wouldn't eat, stayed awake when he couldn't sleep. But something had shifted. Mark barely spoke. The weight of medical bills, his withdrawn stares, and a silence in their bed that stretched for months. She could feel the distance growing every day. Mark wasn't the same man she married. And every time she looked at him, she wondered if she was watching him fade, or if she was fading with him. Then came Alex. Mark's younger brother hadn't been home in years. He lived fast in Chicago, training clients, taking selfies, living life like it had no breaks. But when he heard about Mark's latest scan, he showed up without warning. The moment he walked through their front door, everything shifted. Rachel hadn't seen a smile that genuine in weeks, maybe months. Alex brought noise into the silence. Jokes at the dinner table, beer in the fridge, life in the room. And Mark, though still guarded, seemed lighter, if only for a moment. The day of the new scan results, they sat in the same cold hospital room. Mark expected more bad news. So did Rachel. But the doctor hesitated and then smiled. "There's a new treatment in Europe," he said. "Early results show promise, but it requires more than just physical strength. The mind has to be ready too." Mark blinked. "What do you mean, ready?" "Healing requires hope," the doctor replied. "And I'm not sure you found yours yet." That night, in the quiet kitchen after Mark had gone to bed, Alex turned to Rachel. "You two need a break. Just the two of you. Fresh air, new sky. Greece. I'll pay for it. It's the least I can do." Rachel said nothing, but she didn't say no. Mark didn't like the idea. He hated the thought of being a burden. Hated the idea that his little brother could afford something he couldn't. But when he saw the look in Rachel's eyes, he agreed. A week later, they boarded a plane to Santorini. Mark, weary and silent, clutching his pain like luggage. Rachel, tired but trying, hoping this trip might bring him back to her. And Alex, who smiled as he handed over their tickets. At 35, Mark Williams was preparing for the fight of his life. What he didn't know was that not every battle begins in a hospital. Some begin with a kiss. As this story unfolds, piece by piece, we invite you to stay with us till the end. If you find yourself drawn in, moved, or even conflicted by what you hear, go ahead and give the video a like. It helps more people discover stories like this. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. There's more where this came from, real, gripping, human stories that don't shy away from the truth. Mark barely spoke the morning they left Iowa. His suitcase was half-zipped, his movement slow, like his body was already somewhere else. He didn't complain. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded when Rachel handed him his passport and followed her out the door. At the airport, he seemed out of place. People hurried past them, excited, full of plans. Mark just sat in a stiff plastic chair, watching a child pull on her mother's sleeve. Rachel reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't hold on either. On the plane, Mark took the window seat and stared out at nothing. He didn't speak for the first 4 hours, not even when the flight attendant asked if he wanted water. He turned his face and closed his eyes. Rachel tried to read. She tried to sleep, but her thoughts drifted to Alex, seated behind them. He was chatting with the couple next to him, telling stories about working in Chicago, laughing in that easy way he always had. She glanced back at him once. He caught her eye, smiled. She smiled too, half out of habit, half out of relief. Someone was still trying. By the time they landed in Athens for their connecting flight, Mark looked exhausted. He walked slowly through the terminal, head low, shoulders bent. Rachel held his arm. He let her. Later, on the short flight to Santorini, Rachel sat next to Alex, while Mark took a separate seat near the back. The airline had split their tickets. Mark hadn't asked to switch. He seemed to prefer the distance. Alex leaned toward her as the plane rose above the sea. He said, "You okay?" She nodded. Then, after a long pause, whispered, "I don't know." For the rest of the flight, they barely spoke. But the silence between them was different. Not like the silence she had with Mark. It wasn't heavy. It didn't hurt. When they arrived at the villa, the sun was setting over white rooftops and blue domes. The air was warm, the sky clear. Rachel looked around, taking it in. For a second, it felt like peace was possible. Mark walked straight past the view, into the bedroom, and closed the door. He didn't come out for the rest of the night. Alex opened a bottle of wine and poured 2 glasses. Rachel hesitated. Then she took one. She told herself it was just to relax. She didn't ask why it felt like something more. The villa stood at the edge of the cliffs, quiet, untouched, open to the sea. Everything about it was beautiful. But Mark didn't notice. He barely stepped past the doorway. The view didn't matter. The sun didn't matter. Every morning, he stayed in the same armchair by the window, pouring from the bottle he kept hidden in his luggage. He said it helped him sleep. Rachel knew it didn't. It only helped him disappear. By the 3rd day, Rachel stopped asking him to come outside. He wouldn't even look up when she did. So she went without him. Alex offered to join her, said it wasn't safe for her to walk the cliffs alone. She told herself that made sense. They wandered narrow paths, watched fishermen untangle their nets, ate lunch by the harbor. Alex kept the conversation light. He asked about her work, her childhood, how she and Mark had met. She found herself answering easily, even laughing. It felt wrong to enjoy it, but it also felt good to be heard. That night, Mark was asleep on the sofa, an empty glass on the floor. Rachel stood in the kitchen, staring at him. She didn't recognize the man he had become. His skin looked pale, almost gray. His breath was slow and heavy. The next morning, he was gone. The bedroom door was open. His shoes were missing. So was his coat. Rachel checked the kitchen, the front steps, the road. Nothing. She called his name. No answer. It was Alex who found him. Down by the shore, Mark had walked waist-deep into the water, fully clothed, unmoving. The tide was low. He wasn't trying to swim. He wasn't calling for help. He just stood there, waiting. Alex ran to him, pulled him out. Mark resisted at first, then collapsed in the sand. He didn't speak on the way back to the villa. Rachel followed them in silence. That night, Mark didn't eat. He didn't drink either. He just stared out the window until his body gave up and he passed out on the bed, fully dressed. Rachel sat at the edge of the couch. She didn't cry until Alex sat beside her. She tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. She just let them fall as tears. Alex didn't speak either. He reached for her hand. She didn't let go. One moment led to the next. There was no plan, no decision, just a room, a silence, and 2 people who had held too much for too long. By morning, Rachel couldn't look at herself in the mirror. Mark was still asleep, face down, unmoving. Alex made coffee. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Rachel could feel the shift in him, something new in the way he looked at her, like they now shared something too real to undo. That day, Mark asked to go outside. It was the first time since they arrived. He sat on the patio for an hour, without speaking. Then he went back to bed. Rachel watched him from the kitchen window. She wanted to reach for him. She didn't know if she had the right anymore. Alex came up behind her. He asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. He asked again. She said nothing. Later that night, Mark asked Rachel if she was happy. He didn't say it with anger. He said it like a man who already knew the answer. She told him he needed rest. He nodded, but he didn't close his eyes. The next morning, his behavior changed. He began asking questions he hadn't asked before. What they had done the day he disappeared. Where they had gone. Who they had seen. He watched them closely when they spoke. He listened for things that weren't said. Rachel answered carefully. Alex avoided the kitchen. And Mark, who had once tried to walk into the sea without a word, now watched them both like nothing could be trusted anymore. 2.5 weeks after they returned from Santorini, Rachel stood alone in the upstairs bathroom of their Iowa home. The test took less than a minute. She didn't need to look twice. Pregnant. She sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the floor. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Her breath slowed as her mind raced. Mark had been intimate with her once, maybe twice, during the last stretch of treatment. It hadn't meant much at the time. He was weak, distant. But he had reached for her. And she hadn't said no. Back then, she'd told herself it was a sign of hope. Now, she couldn't be sure. The dates were close. Too close. Close enough that either man could be the father. She told no one that day. The next morning, she made an appointment. Not with a doctor, with a therapist. She told them she needed help managing stress. She didn't mention the affair. She didn't mention the baby. She only said she felt like she couldn't breathe, without feeling guilt press against her chest. At home, Mark was changing. He started eating again. Started asking questions about the baby room they once talked about. He mentioned the treatment overseas, like it was a real possibility now. His voice had a trace of the man she married. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And that only made it harder. Each time he touched her stomach without knowing. Each time he smiled without suspicion. The weight in her grew heavier. Alex hadn't called since the day after they landed. He hadn't texted. Hadn't asked how she was. But Rachel hadn't blocked his number either. Some nights, she'd stare at her phone, thumb hovering over his name. She didn't send anything. She couldn't bring herself to tell Mark. Not yet. Not when he was getting stronger. Not when he was trying. And she didn't want to tell Alex. Because once the words were spoken, they could never be taken back. She kept a secret, telling herself it was temporary. That one day, she'd figure out what to do. But time didn't wait. It kept moving forward. So did the baby. By the 8th week of her pregnancy, Rachel was flying to Europe with Mark. The doctors in Iowa had secured a place for him in a rare, experimental clinical trial. It was the kind of treatment people talked about in whispers, unpredictable, expensive, and almost impossible to qualify for. Mark got in. The first days were rough. He was weak, restless, barely speaking. But then, gradually, things began to shift. The pain receded. His skin brightened. His appetite returned. His voice grew stronger, steadier. And then one morning, as he sat at the edge of their hotel bed pulling on his slippers, Rachel told him. She knelt in front of him, took his hands, and placed them on her stomach. "I'm pregnant," she said. His face changed instantly. First confusion, then disbelief, then tears. He didn't ask for a timeline. He didn't question a thing. He laughed, a real laugh, and pulled her into him. He whispered that this was the sign he'd needed. Proof that his life wasn't over. That he had a reason to fight. She didn't correct him. She let him believe. She told herself it was kindness. That he needed this. That the truth would crush him when he was finally standing again. The days after that moved faster. Mark started walking longer distances. He met every doctor with sharp questions and unwavering eye contact. He made breakfast for her. He wrote notes in a journal he kept beside the bed. Baby name ideas, lists of things they'd need, thoughts about what kind of father he wanted to be. He joked about building a crib when they got back, painting a nursery, picking out lullabies. Rachel smiled through it all. And every time he called it our baby. She nodded. But at night, when he slept, she sat with her phone in the dark, staring at messages she still hadn't answered. Alex had been quiet for a while, but he hadn't disappeared. The first new text came 2 days after she told Mark. "Is it his?" She didn't reply. Then another. "I need to know." She deleted it. Then another number. "You can't lie forever, Rachel." She turned off her phone and left it that way for 3 days. Mark, meanwhile, was thriving. He asked about baby clothes. He brought up schools. He counted weeks and milestones on a whiteboard by the hotel bathroom. He held her belly like it was already full of life. Rachel began to memorize his smiles, unsure how long they would last. And somewhere in the silence she kept, she realized something. She wasn't just lying to protect him anymore. She was lying because she didn't know who she was without that lie. And with each day that passed, the truth became more dangerous. At 4 months pregnant, Rachel was in the kitchen rinsing fruit when she realized her phone was no longer on the counter. Mark had been talking about installing a swing outside. He'd stepped into the living room just minutes earlier. When she followed him, he wasn't there. Neither was the phone. She found him in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the screen, without blinking. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't ask any questions. The screen was still lit. The message was still open. I can't stop thinking about that night. When are you going to tell him the truth about the baby? Alex. No nickname. No code. Just his name. And words that ended everything. Rachel said his name once, softly. He didn't respond. He only set the phone on the nightstand and stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He walked past her, out the front door, and drove away. She didn't follow. For 2 days, she didn't hear from him. Not a call. Not a message. His car was gone. His clothes still in the closet. His journal left open on the dresser, to a half-finished list of middle names. She tried Alex, but he didn't answer either. She thought about deleting the message, pretending it hadn't happened, rewriting the story before it had time to settle. But it was too late. When Mark returned, he said nothing. He showered, changed clothes, made himself coffee. He didn't look at her belly. He didn't touch her hand. He slept on the couch that night, and the next, and the one after that. On the 5th day, he finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost quiet. I need to see Alex. Rachel didn't answer. Mark didn't press. He just walked back into the bedroom, grabbed the journal, and crossed out every baby name on the list. One by one, Mark waited until the sun set. Rachel was in the kitchen again, moving slowly, pretending to be busy. The air between them had gone dry. No arguments. No pleading. Just silence. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a long time before speaking. When were you going to tell me? She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't try to lie. She turned around, leaned against the counter, and looked at him like she'd been rehearsing the answer for weeks. I thought you were dying, she said. I was grieving you while you were still alive. He didn't move. I didn't plan it, she said. I didn't even want it. It just happened. And when you started getting better, when you smiled again, I couldn't take that from you. Still, he said nothing. Rachel's voice cracked. You were gone, Mark. You were right there, but already gone. That night, Mark didn't sleep. He went to the basement, brought up a box of old photos, sat at the dining table and stared at them one by one. Birthday parties, 4th of July cookouts, their wedding day. Alex smiling in every shot, his arm slung over Mark's shoulder like he never had a doubt where he belonged. By morning, Mark made the call. Alex picked up on the second ring. Mark's voice was low, flat. Family meeting. Tonight. He paused. Don't make me come find you. Then he hung up. The Williams family farm sat on the edge of Polk County. Quiet. Spread over 60 acres of corn, rusted equipment, and silence. It was where the brothers spent their childhood summers, where their parents were buried, and where Mark said he wanted to be left alone when the cancer took him. That's where Mark told Alex to meet him. Rachel begged him not to go. She followed Mark to the truck, hand on his arm, belly between them, tears in her eyes. He looked past her like she wasn't even there. He told her, if you want to come, come, but don't say a word. Alex arrived just before dusk. He parked near the old barn, stepped out in jeans and a clean white shirt like it was some kind of peace offering. He didn't bring a bag, just his hands open at his sides and a hope that blood could be replaced with apology. Mark didn't greet him. He stood by the barn door, arms folded, eyes steady. Why here? Alex asked. Mark pointed behind him, toward the dark interior of the barn. Because this is where Dad taught us how to build things. And now I want you to tell me how you tore it all down. Alex hesitated, but stepped inside. Rachel followed, staying close to the entrance. She didn't want to be there. She didn't want to watch. But she did. Inside, Mark didn't raise his voice. He asked questions. Simple ones. How long? Was it more than once? Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? Alex tried to explain. Said it wasn't planned. Said he didn't mean to hurt him. Said Rachel was lonely, and he was just trying to help. Mark nodded through all of it. Then he walked to the wall, picked up a tool older than either of them, a hay hook with a splintered handle and rusted tip. He said, You took my wife when I was dying. You put your bastard in her belly. You made me celebrate a lie. Rachel begged him to stop. She said his name over and over. Said this wasn't him. Said it didn't have to end like this. But it already had. Mark didn't rush. He made Alex talk through every detail, every lie, every moment they thought he didn't notice. And then he made sure Alex never spoke again. When it was over, Rachel was on her knees, her hands shaking, her breath short. Mark dropped the hook, walked over to her, and crouched down. He looked at her belly, then up at her face. "Tell the baby," he said. His real daddy died a coward. It didn't take long for the sheriff to arrive. Someone from a neighboring property had called in a noise complaint. They didn't know what they were hearing, just that something felt wrong. Mark was found sitting on the steps of the farmhouse, hands covered in blood, calm, silent. He didn't run. He didn't resist. He only asked one question. "Is she okay?" Rachel didn't speak on the ride to the station. She sat in the passenger seat of the patrol car, her hands clenched in her lap, her mind trapped in that barn. The questions waiting for her were worse than the silence. The prosecutors called it premeditated. They pointed to the text messages, the drive to the farm, the way Mark forced Alex to confess before ending his life. It was a slow, deliberate killing, and the jury didn't need convincing. Rachel was brought in to testify. She stood before the court with her belly now visibly round, and tried to explain the unexplainable. How the man she loved had become something else. How grief had turned into something sharp. How betrayal had cracked something inside him that never healed. But the truth came with a cost. If she told the whole story, Mark would never see another free day. If she tried to protect him, she would bury Alex twice, once in the ground, and again in silence. In the end, she gave them what they needed. Just enough. Not everything, but enough. Mark Williams was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But some say that what Mark got was worse. A lifetime to think. A lifetime to remember. A lifetime to watch his own story fold in on itself from behind a locked door. 9 weeks after the sentencing, Rachel gave birth in a small hospital outside Des Moines. No family waited in the hallway. No hand to squeeze. No name already chosen. She held the child against her chest and stared at the face that carried traces of both men, too small to know the weight he had entered. She named him Marcus Alexander, a name built from 2 brothers, one dead, one locked away, a name carrying a story that could never fully be told. For weeks, Rachel debated what came next. Some said to move on. Others said to bury the past. But she needed to close a door that had been left ajar too long. She needed to look him in the eye one last time. She booked the visit quietly. No one knew. Just her and the child. A prison clearance form and a bag with bottles and diapers. At Iowa State Penitentiary, the guards recognized her name. One of them asked if she was sure. She nodded once. Mark was already seated in the visiting room when she entered. But when he saw her holding the child, he didn't stand. He didn't blink. She approached slowly, lifting the baby so he could see. "This is Marcus," she said. "He's yours. Whatever you choose to believe, he's still yours." Mark leaned back. His eyes stayed locked on the child. Then his jaw tightened. "That ain't mine to love." The silence after stretched too long. Rachel didn't cry. She only nodded. She held Marcus closer, turned, and walked out. She didn't look back. And Mark never saw the boy again. Rachel stepped out of the penitentiary, the cold air biting against her skin. Marcus stirred in her arms, unaware of the door that had just closed behind them forever. There were no more words to say, no more apologies to offer, no more truths that could fix what had been broken. But there was still life, still choices, still a child who would grow up with a name built from tragedy, and maybe, one day, rise above it. What would you have done? What choices would you have made? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if it made you think, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to check out the channel for more true-to-life stories that challenge, unsettle, and stay with you long after the credits roll. Thank you for watching.